I'm co-host James Ash.
And I'm co-host Phil Scaife.
Welcome to the Business Lockdown. Love to welcome on today's episode, Mr. Guy Wallace. How are you doing, mate? You all right?
Yes, very well, James. Thanks for having
Guy.
me. How you Phil? How you doing?
Guy and I very well under the circumstances. I mean, I think that's probably up to like glass half full mentality. I mean, it's odd, isn't it? It's not great, let's be honest, but we're trying to be positive as much as possible.
As always, James, yeah.
As always, yeah, overflowing. It's not half full, it's overflowing. That's what I've been told sometimes. But Guy and I first met, and I actually didn't remember this until we crossed paths a number of years following our first meeting. I used to have a clothing company, fashion within the fashion business and industry. And Guy came through the door one day, and you had like this. It was in East Yorkshire in Hull, and came into my clothing store, and it was you were launching an app. Was it called The Squirrel or Squirrel? Was that?
Yeah, it was called The Squirrel. Yeah. This was about I don't know how long, maybe 8 years. 8 years ago, maybe.
2011-ish, I think 2011-ish. Yeah, about then. It was an app that was basically to bring people together and customers and benefiting retailers and independents. And I think the one thing I haven't shared with Guy was that it was the one thing that stood out wasn't the product he was delivering. It was just that he was a young lad, clearly an entrepreneur, and having a go at stuff. And that at the time, that really stood out, mate. And it was a pleasure crossing paths a few years later through Jonathan and Christina, Mood Bean, which we'll touch into your connections there. And we had a meeting, and you mentioned, and I was like, of course, that's you. And so it's been amazing to see how you've grown and come through this crazy world of business and entrepreneurship. And Guy has got a very nice office. So let's just, I've been in his office, and it's one of them where you sat there and you just go, I'd have this, definitely.
It's the doghouse. You have to have somewhere where you feel at home when you can't be at home.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to be comfortable.
Nice. So, Guy, we'll tap into your journey and stuff and get insight, and you've got loads of advice to give our audience, which is what this is all about. So thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Let's delve into what's going on with you right now. Let's talk about yourself personally, like what's happening in your industry and, your network around you.
So just to give you a bit of background on kind of what it is I do. So it just gives you a bit of context in kind of what's happening at the moment for me. So my company is called Forward Thinker. That's a kind of, I've always seen it as an umbrella company, and really my passion, if I was to kind of put it into a few words, is I specialize in working with people, brilliant people in their own right, who are often from traditional backgrounds, but have amazing digital ideas. And they maybe don't know how to transition into those ideas or what they're currently doing. And they maybe don't know how to actually, what the future holds, how they, foresee their ideas going, what technologies they need to bring in, how they're going to go about design or development or security. And, so you could say from one point of view that, my business has, turned into, it's been many things in the last few years, but it's, you might say that it's turned into a consultancy in a sense. Personally, my skill set is seemingly kind of unique in the world of digital, whereas quite often you have designers and you have developers, and often those two pools seemingly don't mix. You have to have that kind of middle ground. And my background originally was in design. My first business was actually a photography business, and I'll touch on that later on. But my degree, and since I was a kid, I've kind of 13 years old, started developing websites. My degree was in computer science, and my passion is that middle ground, and it's working with people from a business point of view, but then bringing the design understanding and also the development. So my day might consist of, it might consist purely of development work. I might be developing and coding, or I might be, writing documents or strategies, or I might be designing and putting ideas and concepts together. So there's a bit of a mix. Now, for me, at the moment, it's an interesting time, because I think for everyone there's I can only speak for myself, but so I work in an office environment. I work in a kind of tech hub, and I sometimes work at home. But the last few weeks, for me personally, there has been an underlying anxiety, I think, with what's going on, and being quite astute, I'd like to say, in terms of numbers. I'm interested in charts, I'm interested in statistics and things, and kind of watching this scenario unfold. It's been quite unnerving as well, particularly when you're looking at places like the States and our country as well. That I don't want to delve into political biases or anything, but when you're looking at things unfold and how it's affecting people's lives for the negative, but also in some instances for the positive, there is that underlying anxiety. For me, I'm really grateful. My wife's a teacher, which has been hardline. You could see her as a frontline member of society. We're all really grateful for, and we're lucky in that she has that kind of job, that security and stability. And my job doesn't depend on necessarily being out there and always being in amongst it. I can tuck my way in the side of a cafe, or similar to you guys, James. I know you're all around the world and you're all over the place. I have that benefit. It has affected how my clients and my colleagues and the teams I work with are working, and in some instances they are greatly affected. But for me, it's been overcoming that underlying anxiety and just trying to get on with the day to day.
Where
Have you
are
been
you at with
feeling
that?
that?
Because you said, obviously, you when this all started happening, you referring to it as anxiety. Do you feel like you're sort of out the other side now, and you've sort of worked it out, or are you still processing?
The last week, I think I've gone through. I think I don't know who they is, but they say that it takes 21 days, doesn't it, to settle into a new environment. And even though I do sometimes work from home, I think in this case the environment is globally. It's not just personally. I'd like to say the last week for me has been very productive, but I think before that I've been taking the advice that a lot of people have been giving to families who've got kids, where they're trying to say, look, do this work and do this coursework. And I think parents, a lot of people have been saying, actually, right, the world in an instant has dramatically changed, and we potentially shouldn't be just putting that burden on our kids and trying to get them to sit at a desk, do your schoolwork, do all the things that you should be doing. Rather, take a moment, watch a film, go for a run, go outside, whatever it is that you like to do. Just take a moment and let that 21 days kind of pass and settle, and trying to figure out actually, what you're doing. I think I'm kind of over it, but I think with everybody, we're all a little bit observant and anxious about what's going on at the moment. I don't think that's going to pass even when we come out of this lockdown stage. It'll be interesting to see how things change and how the world changes.
Well, Phil, I know Phil kind of scrapped a curriculum, didn't you, Phil? To give Guy a little insight into how you went at that.
Yeah, so I've got 3 kids. I've got an 18-month-old, a 6-year-old, and a 10-year-old, and so each with very different needs and very different perspectives of this. And so initially, we started off with the school routine and the work, but I think what transpired, what we worked out, was that we had lost, as grown-ups, we had lost control and certainty of things that were happening, and we were trying to impose that back and trying to get some control control back that we should never have expected, and we needed we needed it, not them. And so we had quite a broken household for the first week, where there was a lot of friction, and everyone was trying to do their own thing, but also trying to sort of control the other members of the family. And so in the end, we just identified that it's an opportunity for some growth, not education, not syllabus-based education, but some growth. And so that's sort of like, that's transpired in different versions for each of my kids. It's like one of them, Cooper, he desperately wants to learn French, and he wants to learn how to be a DJ, and he wants to learn, and he's enjoying using Photoshop. So really, as far as a curriculum goes, it's kind of like, well, if you just spend some time each day, you tell me when that time's going to be, when it works for you. And if you do that, then I can see that you're growing and you're evolving, and you're moving forwards, which is kind of what we're all trying to do. And so we're not picking up English books and maths books.
Has either of you attempted to become an artisan baker yet?
Yeah, my wife's done the baking.
Any good?
Yeast was the hardest thing to get a hold of to start.
I can't get hold of anything. I've tried.
Yeah, so the trick for yeast we found was the small little independent like whole food shops and things like that. They're brilliant. They seem to have a supply. But yeah, so yeah, Keris, my wife, she's been baking bread and things like that, and trying all these different things. So yeah, absolutely. In theory, being self-employed, I'm not sure it's 100% true, but we've got all this time on our hands now. And so you can try those different things. But yeah, it's, I think when you talk about anxiety, I didn't have, at the beginning, I didn't think I had anxiety about the situation, but I certainly developed that, in trying to make my home and my household work in like a functional manner. And that, I think that's where I felt it.
It's natural, isn't it?
I felt it last week. I felt, and I got to a point, it was a couple of days, and I mean, Phil and I are in constant communication, hourly, daily. And I could feel my body kind of almost shaking in a way. And that was just like, right, okay, that's your body telling you something here, because I could be very, incredibly strong-willed, of course, and that can often override things. And I think the first proper week of all this, we're fortunate we've got a really good team. It was a shame we had a team member leave us. That was unfortunate in the midst of it all, but our team are incredibly strong, and they did an amazing job for us that first week, and we were pulling 1AMers, 4AMers all week long, and we're now seeing the benefits from that because we've got systems in place, supercharged focus. But last week I could see the impact of that week. I could see it on them, and I struggled with that, because I could see that they were still so determined and driven, but they weren't good. There was migraines coming in. I could see it in their faces. And so we had to respond and adapt to that, of course, as well. And this week, I think the Easter weekend coming up of 4 days has really helped this week, because we managed last week. I think all of us were feeling it after that first week of, right, we're attacking this and we're going for it. And now I spent last week in getting myself into a position to be focused and energized for the team in the way that we all deserved. And this week's been great. We've kind of ironed out, like, we've got ourselves in check, and knowing that we've got a 4-day weekend ahead, and getting everything in place that the team can just shut off, completely shut off.
It's kind of really interesting though, because if we're bridging now the conversation into business and projects and things that you're doing, I've always found you kind of if you put into that fight or flight kind of scenario, which right now, out of the hands of, millions of business owners kind of, in the country and across the world, where, everything was going absolutely great. And then overnight they're put into a corner where they have to make such decisions. You find that when you're running a business, kind of, there might be 4 or 5, if you've been running your business for about 10 years, there'll probably be 4 or 5 moments when you've gone, those pivot points, what the hell am I doing? And what we've kind of seen over the last 3 weeks, and in a lot of cases it's been really inspiring, is a lot of people suddenly plunged into that position, maybe for the first time, in kind of new startups, and then immediately having to think about how they deal with this and how they get perspective on what their business maybe should be or is going to be tomorrow or next week. You see caterers having to deal with it. How do they step from the challenge of how do they bring technology? Particularly, technology has played the ultimate role in all of this. And one of my messages would be to kind of any business: if you're not digital now, why not? Why are you not thinking about that? You see, great. I was saying to James the other day when we were talking, you see these stories on the news of somebody who, maybe rents out a village hall every week to do yoga, and suddenly no one can go. But now they've got 15,000 people logging onto them on their, they're in their garage with a yoga mat and some makeshift lighting. And that person has realized that their world exists beyond the church hall four walls, which is really inspiring. So we can dwell on the negatives, but from hardship and from adversity comes innovation.
Yeah, I was looking at a list of the businesses that came out of the last recession, and so many of the stalwarts now, like the Airbnb, Uber, Just Eat, things like that. They all came out of the last time the world went through this sort of thing, through innovation, through changing an old business model into something that now works in this new environment. So when you talk about restaurants and food places, the eat at home, that sector booms, but the eat out of home, that gets decimated. Hence where Just Eats comes in and things, which is obviously the ultimate digital platform, isn't it?
But even then, with Just Eat, I don't know about you guys, and it's a real shame, but now you're really considering, like you would consider, when you're watching, I don't know, you're watching some series and you're seeing these people shake hands and hug, and you're thinking, social distancing, but the same now when you're ordering your favorite takeaway, you're thinking, it's great food, but what's the process now? And so even this is a threat to, particularly with food. We couldn't get a Chinese the other day, a Chinese, takeaway. There wasn't a single one open. There's a massive drop in Italian takeaways around here. Now they could still actively do business, but the choice, obviously, and the maybe skepticism, or I hate to say it, prejudice, has made their business, at least in the short term, we don't know about the medium term, non-viable. So for a company like that, how do you sidestep and diversify into a side hustle, into something that you can do? It's very difficult for some people, but there's a lot of people who are putting some great thought into it and coming out with some exciting ideas, and even just for their own lives.
Yeah,
when you speak about the certain takeaways there, and I think we've thankfully the majority of people are sticking by the rules and of common sense and whatnot, but when you look at supermarkets and all the beer is sold out and there's a pallet full left of Corona, and you're like, what hope do we really have when that is the mindset of people? I
don't know if you, obviously in Turkey, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the last week in the UK, there's been people burning 5G masks because they're convinced that 5G is the government's way of transmitting the virus into the population. So, we see innovation and brilliance on one side, and we see naturally the balance of life. We have stupidity and, conspiracy theory on the other side. But, for me, I've been really lucky, and in respect, and I don't, I feel very lucky that I can continue to do what I'm doing, hopefully as you guys are. But I'm very aware that a lot of people aren't in that position. And are maybe starting, because of it, are starting new ventures, and perhaps that's an opportunity. You kind of don't want to sell into these situations, but perhaps that's an opportunity for someone like myself and the people who are out there who are trying to provide understanding or knowledge, or in a certain area, to try and help these people who are struggling or innovating or starting something new, a new journey, succeed.
Yeah. So you, in your consulting, the clients who you've been working with, have you seen them making shifts and making changes? Have you got any?
Yeah, because naturally everyone's at home. So my clients are, I have local and then international clients. So I have a client, for example, who's in the States, and they're having a really hard time. Just because of the family stresses, the worries, Medicare, and we're so lucky. You appreciate, that we have what we have in this country. The NHS. If something happens, well, the United States doesn't have that. We work with people in Spain. And Spain it's been kind of traumatic in there. So what I found is the big companies where a lot of the work I will be doing, I'm talking kind of, international companies there. A lot of the work I will be doing won't be core work on their core product, because that'll all be in-house. So the work I'm doing is usually satellite projects around their projects. So I'll be working with small teams now. These are the kind of projects that are the first to kind of die down and are put on hold. Luckily, my focus the past couple of years, I was saying to James the other day, is my business has transitioned so much, kind of every 5 or 6 months. I've kind of tried to be reflective about who I am and what I'm trying to do, and I've never quite been comfortable with saying who I am and what it is I do. The classic elevator pitch. My elevator pitch depends entirely on me knowing who I'm talking to and what interest they might have on, how I can connect with them. It's never the same. If you're selling a product, your elevator pitch is the same. But the last few years, just going back to what I was saying there, the last few years, what I've tried to do is I've been told off kind of by mentors and colleagues about being a plate spinner, and James definitely knows something about that. As a fellow plate spinner, because of the type of person you are, you want to get involved, and you see opportunities, and you see the ways forward or better ways of doing things. But the last couple of years, what I've tried to focus in on, I think I've needed to correct that and focus in on kind of 3 or 4 really key projects. Moodbeam, I think you guys had Moodbeam, Jonathan and Christina on the chat a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, there you go. So Moodbeam is one of those, kind of one of my main focuses, and it's brilliant in the idea, the concept, where it's come from. What that means to me now is that over the last year, I've built some stability in terms of, instead of saying, okay, what's my next project? What's my next job? What should I be investing my emotions and my time into, and potentially lining too many ducks up, where you kind of spread yourself too thinly and you don't give your best to everybody, is focusing on things that I really believe in and things that I really love the idea of, which is a privilege to be able to do, because there's times where I'm trying to do something, I'm paying people, and I might love it, but I'm also collecting housing benefits because I can't pay myself, trying to make something happen, and then that transitions into trying to find any bread and butter work that you can do. you then slip into something where you're kind of not really delighted with what you may be working on day to day. And I think at the moment I've kind of come to a point where, yeah, I've got that stability. I'm working on things that I love. And what a privilege there. So
what springs to mind in being an absolute shocker of either an idea you've maybe tried to run with, or you've maybe really run with, or, because we're with extreme optimism sometimes, we never fail to be surprised along the way, or who comes on board, or we meet and spanners in the works might be thrown in. What springs to mind when you think of a shocker, Guy?
Well, I've cocked up too many times, James, to be honest. Okay. Okay. Well, I'll say that I think the first when I met you, James, I think that was my most expensive lesson.
Interesting.
Expensive emotionally, financially, in all kinds of different ways. So just to give a little bit of background, I've always been into business all my life, bartering and that, the idea of transactions, doing something, commerce. But my first kind of business was when I was, and I'll briefly skip through this, but when I was studying, I bought a camera, my first camera. I've always loved photography. And so this is kind of 13, 14 years ago. And I basically set up in my second year before I was doing my dissertation, and kind of just as Facebook was coming about, I set up a project which was called Picture Yourself at the time. And, I wanted to go out and have fun as a student. And I thought, actually, if I started, photographing everything, I'll build this website, I'll put all the photos onto there, and I'll essentially start building a following, in my own way. Because, followings as such didn't exist. And that we kind of got the entire campus plus a great deal of the public of Hull and East Riding onto this system within a year. And that soon moved into a point where I was then training photographers up, being an amateur myself anyway, and sending those guys out and paying them a wage. And what quickly happened was I was amassing this, and forgive me, these are the days before GDPR. So I was amassing this data set that people didn't have in Hull or in any other city. So, you have students coming in and then they leave 3 years later. So there's a transient market. And people didn't have enough time, companies didn't have enough time to be able to build a data set to market to them. So I very quickly had this marketing hub. And then I thought, my business followed on, and I thought, well, I need to do something with this. Maybe this is my business. So I was just, 18 years old, knocking on, KC, who were the local telecommunications provider, knocking on with my fresh suit on at 18 years old and scruffy student haircut, and basically saying, look, I've got, 40,000 people here that you don't even know exist. Do you want to pay me to email market them? Or, I would never sell the data. But I would then say, listen, I'd go into housing companies, bars, people like James, and he's in the vintage. This is actually when I first met you, James, for this project. And I would just go around and try and say, look, this is what I've got. No one else has got it. You need to market to them. Here's a scenario that I know you need. Do you want to do it? Great. And I'd build up a client. Now that then leads. My business has always been of the making of somebody I've met in the process that I'm taking, a James or somebody who says, I've got this great idea. Can you make this happen? And so kind of long story short, there's a bit in between that, but then arrived the squirrel, and the idea with the squirrel was this nut collecting squirrel, that essentially the nuts being discounts for these companies that I'd built a relationship with from Picture Yourself, And I thought, actually, I need to create a bridge between these companies and this market so that they can interact. So I worked with, at the time, I pulled in kind of 4 or 5 developers or interns or, and at that time, not knowing a whole lot about development, I was kind of in the shadow of the people I was working with from a development point of view. They knew a whole lot more than I did. I couldn't teach them anything. And so at that stage, I was so engrossed so enthusiastic, the word you used there, James, about the concept of what I was trying to do. Okay. And there was a few learning points from that. I put myself in a position where I had to find the money to pay the guys. Okay. So I was doing a full-time sales job. I was going out and meeting the Jameses and the bar owners, the restaurant owners, to sell to them this idea, to make it work, to get them on, to then pay the staff. But at the end of my day, I then had to try and figure out the ways to actually make the money in another way, bread and butter way, whatever it was, to then pay the guys at the end of the month. And it got to the point where I was actually, I was working maybe 2 days every day, weekends, and then going to get housing benefits at that time, which when you're kind of, that's not a great feeling. So I was emotionally drained, exhausted. And then all around me, there's a guy, and I don't know if he'll watch this, and if he does watch this, then I had a meeting with Paul Sewell, and Paul Sewell runs a great company called Sewell's, based in Hull. And I'd never really met Paul before, and I kind of rang him up and I said, look, I need a bit of time with you, and I want to tell you what I'm doing. And I went in, and the first 5 minutes, I unloaded everything like I kind of do. I unloaded everything that I was working on. And he was like, I know nothing about any of that, so I can't talk to you about any of that. But then he just proceeded for about 2 to 3 hours, just me and him. And I know how much his time's worth. He proceeded then with a flip chart to just unload on me everything that he's learned, everything, the books that I should be reading, this, that, the other. And one of the things he told me there was a book about, it's called The Dip. I think it's Seth Godin. I'm not completely sure, The Dip. But anyway, it was the way that he put it across to me, and he drew this valley, and it was like, okay, you've gone down into this valley. You are now standing at the bottom of this valley, and where you want to be is at the top of this. But there's a lot of things that you need to be taking into account here. You need to be looking at your well-being. Are you personally able to do this? Okay, which is, you're obviously going to, at the time when you're up for it, you don't want to be told no, and you want to move forward with your idea. But he was right, because I probably spent another year working on this, and then I got to the point where I was absolutely exhausted. No money. I wasn't bringing, so many lessons. I was building a product that required the chicken and the egg scenario. You needed the people to get the businesses to get the people. Okay, I was building a product where a year or two into it, O2 Priority Moments came out. Groupon started to rise through. So I had Groupon providers now selling into the space that I was selling into. I had a team where they were also transient. So interns were there, and then suddenly they weren't, and they built a position within the business that was now unfillable without retraining and so, and I sat there, and actually I had, maybe 200 businesses, really good businesses on this product. I had people lining up outside of clubs in Hull, all sharing the app, downloading to get their free entry. On the face of it, it was successful, and I just had to kill it. Because in reality, it wasn't going to happen without me having a huge amount of funding. And when when I took what Paul Sewell said, and that kind of lesson about the dip, and actually putting your head above the trench or the parapet and looking around at actually what is happening and the risk that you're putting yourself into, I had to kill it. And I had to focus on the bread and butter. What was I good at? What were my skills? What could I bring to people where that was more black and white, that there was one transaction, there was this for that, back to the commerce, rather than the theory and the dream, which is really difficult.
So what's the key? Because we always ask, like, what piece of advice would you offer our audience? And that can be based on anything. But I think that's an amazing story and great insight for us. That's incredible. And yeah, having to make that decision, because I'm sure it wasn't just a quick decision, and there was some sleepless nights there. But what piece of advice would you give our audience based on that you really took from that?
From that scenario, be aware of what's happening. Don't be find the balance between aspiration and foolishness. When people are telling you again and again, people will always tell you, a lot of people like to be in the way of something that they're not doing or they're not contributing to. People will always tell you, you can't do that, but what about this? Have you thought about this? And really ideas, this is an indirect lesson, and it's something that I've learned all the way through. And, particularly with digital, ideas develop. An idea will start as a pinprick, in the middle of the night that wakes you up and you think, wow, that is, how can I progress this idea? But every day someone will say to you, well, have you thought about this? And you don't need to. What you need to think about is, what are you going to work on in that particular day to get you to a point where you actually are then standing at the precipice where you go, okay, I know if I step over this is now the next 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 years of my life dedicated to this. And you need to speak to the right people. You need to be observant of what's happening, and not be, swimming with your face in the water all the time. You need to be listening to people. You need to be taking criticism, in the way that it's meant. If it's criticism that is coming again and again and is saying, listen, you need, if there's alarm bells ringing, you need to be listening to those. My other 2 points is, I think one's really simple. In any business you're in, if you're not digital, be digital in some form. That doesn't necessarily mean being on Twitter and trying to make yourself write something every day to build a following that maybe doesn't bring you business value. That might be looking at your operations. It might be looking at how you communicate with your team or your clients. At the moment, we're seeing so many people who don't have that digital safety net, or who are now very quickly looking to transition into digital, which is great. And the other thing that I would suggest is, has been one of my main, to be honest, it's been the core of my business, is people. So I've always tried to remember everyone that I meet. I always try to get it sounds, I think this is just really good advice for anyone anyway. I always try to remember 3 things about them, 2 or 3 things about them. I always try, and even if I'm sitting on a shared table with someone on a train from Hull to London, I try to find out what they do. Okay. And I try to think if there is any possible opportunity, even in 5 years' time, that I might want to connect with that person. I certainly don't, there's these huge kind of business network meetings and things. I always, if I'm going to one of them, I'm definitely not the person who's going around saying, my name's Guy, this is what I do, here's my business card. My name, I go in, I find the person who's standing alone with a pint, and I talk to him about football or music for an hour and a half. because that's how it works, isn't it? You then learn something else the next time. And in 3 years' time, that person gets in touch and says, "Oh, do you remember? Are you still doing this?" And so the other bit of advice is, it can be a long game. It's a long game, and treat people with respect and try and learn about what other people are doing. Create a, it's so cliche, create a network, but create a network of quality people, and learn about them. Yeah.
Love that. Love that.
Brilliant.
Guy, before we wrap up, I spoke about how nice your office is. Phil, you'll have to go and visit sometime.
Tempted.
And it was one that I've been in Guy's office for a while and thinking, yeah, I could have this. And then you start like saying, this is really nice, mate. It's like, oh, do you like it? Yeah, yeah. So I guess you get used to it. I'm sure you have your honeymoon period in an office like that. And then there's just amazing photographs in lovely frames that just sign this office off. And then you said, "Oh, I took all of those." I was like, "What?" And then we went down the conversational path of how you got on stages and shot artists and stuff like that. So I think to wrap this, I'd love to know what's your favourite photograph you've taken that's on your wall in your office and why.
Yeah, well, to be honest, I did say I'd mention that. I will answer your question in a second. I know that I've answered with particularly long rambles in this interview. But the biggest turning point in my life, apart from doing the course that I did, was buying a camera. All right, because it makes you look at everything through a lens, through a very different kind of medium than you usually do. And as James just alluded to there, and whole university won't condone this, but me and a couple of friends for a few years essentially contacted festivals all around Europe and pretended we were journalists working for the university magazine. So with that, we got press passes to these festivals. So there was, and I'm a big hip hop fan. Big into my music anyway, but I do love hip hop, and a lot of these festivals were alternative music festivals. And there was a bouncer. I was at the front of the stage, and I said to the bouncer, who was Belgian, I think, "Do you mind if I sit on the stage?" And we were watching Wu-Tang Clan. Now, if you're a hip hop fan, Wu-Tang Clan, their album, 36 Chambers is probably in your top 10.
I had the baggy jeans and the chains coming off and playing basketball every waking hour,
So Wu-Tang Clan were playing, and the bouncer let me sit on the stage. And at one point, so I was watching, I'd never seen them before. I was photographing them as they were jumping over the top of my head onto the speaker that was behind me to 100,000 people who were to the left of me singing every word. And there's a couple of pictures, one of them's on my wall, that to anybody else will look at it. The thing is, with my pictures in my office, anyone will look at it and they either think, "Oh, you've just pulled that from somewhere," or, it doesn't really mean a whole lot without the context. But every single picture there, when I give it in my head the context and the emotion and the feeling of when I was there, it was really special. And that's all because of blagging, really. That's another, blag.
Tip number 4.
Beg, borrow, befriend. If you're starting a business, do those 3 things. Try and get what you can, So Wu-Tang Clan, and then also there's a picture of some killer whales in Vancouver when I was with my wife a couple of years ago, coming alongside the boat. So that's it.
Awesome, Guy. We could talk forever, but we do know that you're going through a rebrand process with your business.
Yeah.
And we've already said coming into this that we'll definitely love to connect when you come out of that. And I think that'd be great as a subject to give insight into rebranding. And you know, we can always say we should have done it sooner, or we've done it wrong, or we've spent too much money, or we shouldn't have rebranded. You know, all of those things. Yeah. So I think that'd be a great episode to focus on when you come out of that, and hopefully by then we're in a much different position, all of us.
We might have all rebranded by then. So
very good point.
Yeah.
Good point. On that point, Guy, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks guys. See you all later on.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Business Lockdown.
Please comment, like, share and subscribe to help build our global community.
We look forward to seeing you all soon.